This is prior to me deconverting. It's north of Dallas. It's a mega church, well over 2,000 or 3,000 people coming in every weekend. They hired me kind of prior to my graduation, and I went out on vacation and came back. And then when I came back, the senior pastor was like, "Hey, we're gonna let you go." And I was like, "Okay, I understand that." And I took it like a man. But then the worst thing happened, and is that him and one of the elders came to me and they were like, "But we don't really want you to talk about that from the pulpit. Here's what we want you to say." And so they handed me a written letter, and that's what they wanted me to read from the pulpit. A totally different message. The message was that I was leaving because I wanted to pursue different interests.
So that it was a lie. It was a lie.
It was a lie.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert, and today I have Mark Peralta joining us. How are you, Mark?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Happy to, be in this show. So, hello, everyone. I'm Mark.
I am as well. You participate in a YouTube channel, and this is like the Spanish atheist experience you were telling me about.
That's right. Yeah, we championed a similar format where there's different segments where they talk about like current events. My segment is the atheologist, where I talk about Bible problems, a little Bible exegesis, things like that, sort of like free from bias towards a religion or belief in a God. And then there's other segments too, that secular conversations. So they're sort of kind of mimicking the atheist experience, YouTube experience.
Nice.
Yeah.
Lots of videos. If you speak Spanish, this is home for you. Consider helping support us on MythVision's Patreon as well. Okay, so you reached out to me and you let me know, like, hey, Derek, I've got, background, was very serious about Christianity. Took it so serious that I ended up going to college and was, I think you said, translating, or trying to get the gospel, to defend your faith that you believe so much. Tell us your background, what you were raised in, and then kind of let's get into your journey of what happened.
Sure. I was raised in South America, in Colombia, as a Catholic, baptized as a baby. Then later, my parents, we all migrated to the States. I was about 13 years old. And then from then on, here in America, I sort of faded away from Catholicism and then became an evangelical Christian, newborn Christian. I rebaptized, profession of faith, baptism at age 25. And then shortly after, I felt like I needed to be, I just was fascinated by theology, by the scripture, by the preachers, and so I went into Bible college. I got into Dallas Baptist University, where I did a major in biblical studies, also majored in science as well, because I loved science. And at the time, I've been working in dentistry has always been sort of like my thing in management. So did a dual degree. Then in my senior year, I felt like, and I was eventually wanted to be a dentist. But then I felt like I had a calling to go to seminary and just pursue this new gained understanding, this passion that was on fire for theology and for the Bible.
Did you go? Did you actually go?
Yeah, so I went to Dallas Theological Seminary, where I obtained sort of like a dual degree as well. I started as a Master of Arts in Biblical Literature, where I had hoped to participate in Bible translating and that sort of thing, take the gospel to the remotest parts of the world, sort of thing. And I was trilingual at the time, so I was really into languages. I speak fluent Spanish, and Italian, and English. So for that degree, I had to take all the Bible courses, the exegesis courses, and all the language courses. So I did about 5 years of Bible languages, Hebrew and Greek. Studied under Daniel Wallace, who writes the the textbook on Greek grammar. If you've gone to seminary, you might be familiar with his work. And it's just been a ride, because once I gained that understanding and I gained the tools where I could do research on what the Bible is actually saying in its original language, then it began to open my eyes, and then I had more questions than answers.
Yes.
By the time I graduated from seminary.
So were you around at the time that the whole controversy of Daniel Wallace was saying that we found a first century Gospel of Mark?
I think that was first, like that was like just prior to that, before it came out that it was a fraud.
Okay.
I think they were sort of like, when I was there, I remember, like, I didn't go to the debate, but that big debate with Bart Ehrman happened while I was in seminary.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were on Daniel Wallace's side at the time, I suspect, saying, "Oh, heck no, Bart, get out of my face. God is real, sure. And you're trying to, like, suppress the truth and unrighteousness."
Yeah. So he's just a liberal scholar,
That's the term you used that I found interesting, that you hear a lot. I forgot that was used so often when I was actually in Christian circles. They use this term, liberal scholar. Like, they don't mean anything political by it. They mean as far as a scholar who is not conservative in their roots of interpretation of literally taking these things to the bank. If the Bible teaches the earth is young, you need to believe the earth is young. And if you're going along with saying that the earth is older, you are being swayed by those liberal scholars. And that word liberal scholar comes up a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just how I don't know. It's just sort of is like you're already strawmanning anyone that disagrees with your position or your tradition.
When you were in Dallas Theological Seminary, it's the same thing there? It was like liberal scholar, were there scholars that were still considered good, like, let's say, William Lane Craig? Was he in Dallas Theological Seminary, was he kind of convinced, or did people in that seminary think, hey, this guy's got liberal tendencies, but he still holds on to some of the fundamentals, so we can't throw him away completely?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the professors would support his work because he's more of an apologist than a scholar. But certainly, I mean, I was surrounded by Darrell Bach. I mean, he was one of my Bible professors, a New Testament professor, and he's major on the historicity of Jesus. There's quite a tradition in Dallas Seminary as well for dispensationalism also. Most of the dispensationalist writings are going to come, that tradition comes from Dallas. So they've got they're in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And they got to compete with the other seminary too, the Southern Baptist. That's
right.
Yeah. So it's as conservative as it gets.
Exactly. And I mean, that's the point. There's no knowledge that can really be new. They figured it all out. And you can't go any further. You have to just go with what you already have and work with what you have to discover new things within that bubble. What happened? What happened to you? I mean, you were devout. You even admitted that you were a Calvinist at some point. When did that happen?
I mean, very early on. I think that I fully embraced that literist approach to Scripture, and so. But in seminary, I felt like I just had more questions at the end than reassurance. One of those was their teachings in the prophets. I felt like I had high expectations for when we went into with some of the Old Testament prophets that specialized in the prophetic books, and I felt like they were just kind of brushing over it because there's so many issues there. And that's what I'm trying to bring to light is the Old Testament that we understand as we understand it from a Christian perspective is not exactly what the Hebrew text is trying to say. And there's not quite as much consistency between the two as testaments for them to be sort of merged together the way they are.
Yeah, discontinuity.
I too worked in a church I was associate pastor for a mega church here in Dallas for a brief period. And it was not a good experience for me. I felt like, because I had experience working in the medical field, so I noticed some stark differences between how people relate with one another and how the culture is in a church, and I just didn't like it. I felt like I was farther from my family that I could ever be. Just being at church almost like 6 days out of the week. And then you don't have weekends, so it's sort of like the work-life balance was not a good thing. I felt that, and so I didn't return to ministry. Some things sort of were kind of weird also. I don't know if you want to get into that, but I never went back to the church.
Feel free to. I'd love to.
This is prior to me deconverting. Basically, what went on in the church is we felt like there was a real need for a worship pastor that would be like permanent, because we had just volunteer. And so the music quality was lacking. And so I was really like, we had that end of the year meeting kind of thing. And I was really championing the idea of bringing someone full time that would have also experience and, revamp the worship ministry. And so I went out on vacation and came back. And then when I came back, the senior pastor was like, "Hey, we're going to let you go." And it's because that, you're right. We do need a worship pastor. The ministry is lacking, and we really can't budget for an associate pastor and a worship pastor. So we're going to have to let you go. And I was like, okay, I understand that. And I took it like a man. But then the worst thing happened, and is that him and one of the elders came to me and they were like, but we don't really want you to talk about that from the pulpit. Here's what we want you to say. And so they handed me a written letter, and that's what they wanted me to read from the pulpit. They wanted me to, it was on a Friday, and they were like, we'll see you on Sunday.
So they wanted you to literally resign with their words in your mouth about what to say about your resignation, rather than you just going on and saying, listen, we just don't have the capability of keeping me employed and having a senior worship pastor to give you better worship music. Do you remember the words? Was it like definitely against what you were wanting to say, or?
Yeah, it was a totally different message. The message was that I was leaving because I wanted to pursue different interests.
So that it was a lie. It was a lie.
It was a lie. Because first of all, I was not resigning. I was being let go. And then with that resignation came but you can still come to our church and we'd love to have you kind of thing. And I was like very troubled by the whole situation. And now you're asking me to read something that's inaccurate. That's a lie.
Can I ask what church this was, or no?
I'd rather not mention, but okay. It's north of Dallas. It's a mega church.
It's a mega church. Okay.
It's a mega church in the sense that there's well over 2,000 or 3,000 people coming in every weekend.
Okay.
So,
wow.
We have big churches here in Texas.
So emotionally, you definitely experienced some, like, from Christians. The last people you would expect are the people that you actually realize, like, hold on, this is not Christ-like.
Absolutely.
Are you still in seminary at the time?
I was still sort of, because they hired me kind of prior to my graduation, and then I just had some leftover online courses, and then I graduated.
Okay.
So yeah.
And are you a Calvinist at this time?
Sure, I was.
Okay.
I was still very much, a believer, and I remember having a couple of exit interviews with an elder that sort of took an interest in me, and no one else, by the way, ever called me, say, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" Ever. Only this one elder one time. And I was like, yeah, I'm still, he asked me, do you still believe in Jesus? And I was like, sure, there's no problem. I'm taking issues with the church. And so I think I started sort of buying into like the whole first century synagogue model type of church. Kind of mega church is not a good idea.
Right.
Maybe we should kind of go back to how they used to do things in the ancient world, and having less, smaller churches where you can have more intimacy or whatever. But we honestly never went back to church. My wife and I and kids, we just felt like we were really burned out by the whole situation. And we first thought, hey, we need just some time. And we took like 2 years and said, you know what, let's reflect back, and is it something we want to go back to? And we just felt like lives were much better now.
When is this? What year is this?
So this would have been like, all right, so 2015, 2016.
Okay. And you're still a Christian, but just like me, after I was excommunicated from the Presbyterian Church, I was still a believer, but I didn't have people down my throat or watching every move I made or what I was looking into. And I was able to kind of, watch certain things through the internet that I would never have been willing to do while actively in a church. And so, what happened with you in this time now that you're not being supervised? There's not anyone who's over you, an overseer, making sure that you can or cannot do something. What happened? Did you come across some material, or what made you start to doubt?
So I sort of, when I went through seminary, I amassed a little library of commentaries and just really good books. And so I never stopped. I never put a book down. I just kept on studying and digging deeper. But honestly, I think that for me, that light bulb that, hey, is there a possibility that I could be wrong, that I could just be deceived into thinking that there is a God and that this God is the biblical God? I think that started with me watching Matt Dillahunty, to be honest with you, and the debates and those conversations. Because I realized that many of the apologists' objections to the arguments and things like that, or their justifications, everyone is just saying the same thing. The Muslims, when they argue for God, they have the same arguments, and it's all just philosophical. There's really no hard evidence for a deity, and much less that we could affirm that this deity is the biblical God. And then I just became inspired to like watch your show and start reading the liberal scholars that I avoided like the plague.
People don't get it. People don't get
So,
it. The reason that's like, they're like, why aren't you bringing on a conservative scholar? Why don't you do this? I came from that.
yeah.
I heard all of this. No, it's the other side of the coin you don't really hear. It's the other material that you don't get. And so yes, that's one of the reasons I have them on, is to get people educated on material that they would have never. I mean, they're in books, but they're not going to read them. So if they watch a video that's entertaining on an episode where a person's kind of pulling out these things and hearing them say it, and it makes more sense, what's going to happen? So yeah, Matt Dillahunty is a big player in terms of getting a lot of people to at least question and begin to really go, what if Matt's right? That happens a lot.
Yeah. And that's how I found the atheist experience and Nuestra Experiencia Atea. Just through that search just popped into my YouTube page and in my homepage. And so I was like, oh, wow, there's a Hispanic version of this where these issues are even more obscured and censored. Like there's not that much out there in Spanish because they're a tight system. Like Catholicism they rule South America.
Yeah.
So, and not to mention some of the other dangerous organizations like the Jehovah's Witnesses. So they're even more scared to come out and say something.
You have a friend on that channel that you said is afraid to show his face.
Yeah, several people that we are in fact, we have like weekly meetings where we just hang out and say hi, and they're still like, in caricature, because they really don't want to be exposed in fear that their family will persecute them or kick them out of their congregation. And I just, it's sad.
Wow. Yeah, I deal with that a lot with the ex-cult stuff that I interview on, as you've seen. Um, some of the material going from a Calvinist over to Waking Up. You said Matt Delahunty's debates, because then at least you could listen to a Christian arguing with someone else, but you're forced to listen to the someone else, which would be Matt Delahunty or whoever else. Is there any material that you can recall that started to make you think early on, like, hold on, I always understood that as this, but this made better sense, and it started to convince you that the liberal scholars, as we like to coin the phrase, were actually more correct than what we've been taught, what seminary taught you?
Right. Yeah, I think for me was when I learned of the documentary hypothesis in seminary, when it's like, wait a minute, like Moses' authorship is in question here. Because it's like if Moses is like he's the man, right?
Right.
And so if that's questionable, then what else is questionable? And so then once I learned how to like read and translate Hebrew and Greek, like the New Testament Greek, then I could look into the LXX, Septuagint, and see what it says, and then run comparisons and see what one says and the other. And I'd say that's where maybe, not maybe, but definitely Tobias Singer has been quite insightful in highlighting, bringing out some of those mistranslations from Hebrew to English. And then also the issue with the LXX, in the sense that even it was mistranslated and then manipulated by the Catholic Church in like the 2nd, 3rd centuries then on.
There's a lot of interesting things I have Rabbi on for, and people go, why aren't you challenging his views? And it's like, that's not why I have him on. I do other shows where we talk about the Old Testament. We deal with the God of the Hebrew Bible. But yeah, as far as the Septuagint goes, you do have like the completed Septuagint later and preserved by Christians, which can be something we need to look at. There is older fragments we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls that can kind of give us ideas of a Greek, Hebrew literature or Greek Old Testament Bible literature. And sometimes they preserve what looks like older material than the Hebrew we have. So there might be something in the Dead Sea Scrolls that gives us more data. And I think Rabbi takes the position that all of the Greek, anything Greek about the Hebrew Bible is not right, because Orthodox Jews, of course, favor the Hebrew and the Masoretic and say it's been preserved accurately since day one. But there are good reasons to think that's not the case as well. I mean, in Deuteronomy 32, it talks about many gods in the heavens, and this idea. I think Deuteronomy 32:43 in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have a Greek version of this that has passages there that aren't there in our Hebrew, but they're there, and it looks very polytheistic, or at least it's holding on to something that looks very old.
For sure. They had their own redactions as well.
Yeah. But it's wonderful listening to Rabbi Tovia go into this to show how different the New Testament is. Even if you use the Greek, right? The Greek Old Testament, there's a lot of differences, and they had a lot of liberty in how they interpreted the prophecies. Now, I don't know about you, but coming from conservative Christian thinking, finding out New Testament authors were liberally interpreting these things to mean whatever, and you're like, how did they get that? That looks liberal. So, you know what I mean? Like, when you start finding out the very foundation of which you held on to looks, by the standards of what we talk about today and call liberal within conservative Christianity, they did what we call liberal scholarship on Hebrew Bible, prophecies. It's like the pot calling the kettle black, and it is the very thing it's calling. That'll destroy the foundation at which you held on the scriptures.
Oh, for sure. They make a huge emphasis on like the difference between exegesis and eisegesis, and how eisegesis, you're bringing in ideas into the text and you're reading into it. And usually that lends itself for misapplying a text or taking something out of context. But the New Testament authors are doing exactly that, you know.
Thank you.
And
That
it's
is a
like, who are
wonderful
we
point.
to then criticize this? Because they're doing the same. They're guilty of the same sin.
I actually went to Carolina Bible College, which I didn't do a seminary program, but it was the college before you go to seminary, and they changed the name to sound more sophisticated. Carolina College of Biblical Studies, to sound like they're, you know, like, oh, we're. But I went there for a few years, and they really love harping exegesis, exegesis, getting out of the text, but not like adding anything, not taking away anything, just taking what the text says out. Eisegesis, like you said, adding stuff to it that wasn't there. And that is exactly what the New Testament author, gospel authors, Paul, all of them are doing, is taking liberty with interpreting. And sometimes, how did they get that? You know, where did that come from the text? And so that methodology completely falls apart, and it really starts to ruin everything you thought you believed and knew. Starts to fall apart. So when Christians are asking themselves, and all these apologist channels are saying, why are people leaving the faith? Why are people... I hope to think my shows played a significant role in saying, when you start to see the very foundation that all of your seminaries that are teaching people to go into in a ministry, that are teaching apologists to go out there and teach apologetics and talk about exegesis and eisegesis and this and that, when you see that all crumbling apart based on what we're talking about here, then you could start saying, why are people falling away? Why are people not recognizing that this is true anymore? Oh, there's a reason. Because it's not. Point blank. The best you have is everyone become very spiritual and liberal in their approach,
Mm-hmm.
or you go into a church that doesn't take scripture too seriously. It's more about the tradition, like Eastern Orthodox or, you know, Roman Catholic or something like that.
Absolutely. And then if you care enough to like read some of the more ancient stuff, like I'm no expert, I'm just a huge fan of like ancient Near and Eastern studies.
Mm-hmm.
And so you read the epics like the Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, all of those Sumerian or Babylonian myths, and a lot of those ideas like the flood were already being people were saying this already. These myths about floods were already present by the time the Bible or the Jewish Bible came up with those ideas. So they're not even original. And once you once you analyze the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible enough, you start noticing that what they're actually doing is not presenting new information, but they're actually just putting out polemics against them, rather, in response to them. Like the Tower of Babel thing in Genesis 12. That's a polemic against a actual tower
Genesis
that was
11,
in Babylonia.
but yeah,
11,
I get
right.
it. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. Abraham is in 12.
Yep.
So you know, the flood narrative, that's also present in the Sumerian myths. So they're not even original, man. So that's the thing where you're like, all right, well, they're not even original. There are all these inconsistencies. The New Testament does not necessarily flow out of the Old Testament without performing gymnastics with the text. So we have every reason to question it, you know, and the more we look and the more we study, the more I look into these matters, the more I'm convinced that we don't have a reliable text.
Did they in seminary go through the difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? The better question to ask in that is, were they trying to defend it and try to like show that they aren't contradicting, even though they were trying to explain the documentary hypothesis? Or were they actually going, okay, Genesis 1 is probably written by a different author than Genesis 2, and they do not have the same goal?
Yeah, they just sort of like they try to do it in the least. They're going to cover their. They're treading very carefully. They're treading carefully with it.
Right.
So they'll explain here's the hypothesis, but ultimately, right, the position of the seminary is that the Word of God is all inspired. And that it's infallible and inerrant.
Yeah, you can see him
You
smiling
know,
because it's like,
yeah,
I
that
don't.
tradition of an heresy, Norman Geisler.
Oh yeah,
He's got a DTS background.
I studied under a
Yeah,
man named Thomas McCuddy, and Thomas McCuddy was a disciple of Norman Geisler. So,
yeah,
you know, Norman Geisler passed away, of course, and then Thomas McCuddy, he was really good friends with me. He started trying to teach me philosophy. Was like kind of one of my personal. I was kind of one of his disciples in a way,
yeah,
but he
yeah,
was
yeah.
trying to get me out of Calvinism, and he was in some Baptist version of Christianity, and he used to like challenge me on that. And I would come to the text. I was like, let's go to the text. Like, I'd rather stick with what I think the text is saying and not go with what you think is comfortable, because I'm sure he's seen some of the issues. And no matter what position you take, there's a problem. No matter where you go, you could be a consistent Calvinist, there's still going to be a problem, no matter what. You know, one thing, we
Mhm.
talk about liberal scholarship. I want to ask you as an ex Calvinist. You remember that passage in John 6 where it says, when Jesus says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And you remember, if I be lifted up, the Son of Man be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And as Calvinists, right, we see these all, and we always get triggered. So we're like, okay, all of the elect, those are the only ones that he's
Right.
drawing to him. But if you're more liberal in this approach, what all it's saying, I think, and tell me if you think this is right, when it says all men, I don't think it means literally like a number of how many people. I think it's trying to say, look, it's not just Jews. It's saying like any nationality, any people from any culture, like all men, generically.
Hmm.
And so we take theology, systematic theology, so literal and conservative that we're like missing the point that this is a Jewish movement that is expanding. And all he's saying is like, my crucifixion and resurrection is supposed to like go to the nations, like people beyond the scopes of Jews. And we take it so literal that, you know, and conservative that we're missing the very point of what maybe he's implying in the text. Does that make sense?
It does, but we're not. They're not always gonna be consistent with that either. Because then,
True.
if it gets him in trouble to take a text literally, then it's like, well, the context is a little different. Like for example, the scriptures that talk about slavery, endorsing slavery in the Old Testament, they won't take those verses literally.
Right.
Like it's that whole thing about like it's okay to beat up your slave as long as he doesn't die within 3 days, right?
Right.
What's happening there?
Yeah, they
Is
will.
that a
They
literal thing, or is that? And the other thing is like all even figurative language like poetry does have some literal meaning behind it. Otherwise, it makes no sense.
Mhm.
You know. So what is that literal meaning? You can't
Exactly.
escape it. The promises for this Messiah thing, right? The kingdom of God and all the fulfillments that are prescribed by the prophets that it would be like, they never happened. So what are we doing there? We're not taking those prophecies literally. Oh, it's just prophetic fulfillment. So then you start justifying everything. That's the game of the theologist. The theologian is to make it fit, no matter what. You're making it fit.
That makes me think of the opposite, like the universalist, right, of Calvinism. They kind of are Calvinist, but they don't limit, and they just go all the way. Oh, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men, literally all men, literally, and like this idea that at the end everybody's going to come. That's what he means, and everybody will be saved. Another conservative approach to try and like wrestle with these issues. I noticed that with the studying I've done with the academics I brought on today and the critical approach, all of that stuff's like looks silly now. What have you seen on MythVision that has like really attracted you? That's been interesting.
I've really enjoyed the work of Dennis MacDonald. You see the book. I've got that Mythologizing Jesus back there. I feature it in the channel. And you've got a few people there that I've taken quite interest. I've taken renewed my interest in Bart Ehrman as well. So it's been really helpful for me to see and just how unique and how special it is, the format that you do it, where You're not necessarily trying to take what it is. You're looking for those kernels of truth because some people have those, and that's awesome. So I'm really glad to be a fan and to be educated by the people that you feature in this channel.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, Bart Ehrman. How does it feel knowing Bart was arguing against Daniel Wallace, one of your guys, and now you're on the other side? I've experienced this myself. I literally used to hate people like Robert Price and you name it, like all of
Mm-hmm.
the different academics that were skeptics. I hated them. And once I started to realize, like, holy crap, this, what we're talking about with liberal scholarship, actually makes more sense in the way they're approaching the Bible. And the fact that they're not inventing this invisible force field around Christianity, that supposedly this one was protected from the whole world around it, and all of their ideas are unique to the Christianity, but nothing comes from anything else. No, 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 no. Once you realize all the building blocks to all of this stuff comes from, you name it. It's a big snowball that's rolling downhill, and anything in its path or near it gets picked up into the snowball. Christianity just grabbed and mutated and incorporated all of these different things.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's an ever evolving ideology. I think that's one of the things that are important to grasp is Christianity was not the same way in the first century that it was in the third century or the fifth century or even now. It's an ever evolving beast.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
How's your wife taking the whole thing? Like, was she seriously devout when you were, or?
Yeah, we both were because she was like she sings really well, and so she was in the worship ministry, and um, she's we were all her family is her dad's side of the family, their church. They have church in Connecticut, and they're all in the church. It's like a big cult up there. And so yeah, I get prayed over because some people know that I'm not a believer anymore. They think that I've just sort of like that backsliding concept. They're backslidden Christian.
Right, right.
Yeah, so it's crazy.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
yeah, we both deconstructed from all this. Yeah.
And
So
you guys make an appearance every once in a while when you visit their family and you go to the church?
no, we don't travel out there very much. But some of them have moved here, and so like this
Um,
last Christmas was interesting because I just get prayed over all of a sudden. Like, hey, like when you're saying goodbye, it's like you've strayed away from the Lord, blah blah blah, and they all think all this is demonic, and that's the other thing is that they demonize, having this sort of like critical thinking.
yeah. Yeah, I
So,
remember thinking that way. It's actually very uncomfortable. I was at a wedding not too long ago with my friend Jose Mahano is his name, and he got married. It was a wonderful wedding. His father has become very religious over like his later years. But on his wallet, he has this like quote from Jeremiah. I had wondrous things for you, great plans. You know that passage. I think it is something
uh-huh.
like that. And he like walks up to me as if like I know he knows, and he's like, "Derek, you need to come back to the Lord on your heart." Really uncomfortable. I must admit the way that they try to make you feel. And I just was like, yep, I didn't argue. I was like, okay, okay, I'm just listening because you don't want to argue with these people. But at the end of the day, you're like, man, I used to be like this. I used to do this to people who were actually skeptics as well. I got to taste my own medicine, my wife said. And I did not like it. It was like not cool. I did not like it.
For sure. Like I evangelized my whole family because I mentioned that I grew up Catholic, so all my grandparents are here, cousins, uncles, they're all like Catholic, and I evangelized them all. Like they go to Baptist church now,
Oh wow.
and here I am. Like I'm like no, I'm actually not even of God. I don't believe in God anymore, and they're just in shock. They're just in this shock.
That is,
Yeah,
you and me have a lot in
I'm
common, man.
responsible for.
Were you the most like devout Christian in the whole household the way you were about things?
I mean, yeah, because I was like, so my family is, like we have the matriarch, right? My grandmother is like the matriarch, and I'm the firstborn of her firstborn. So I've always been like like one kid that is meant to do something big, from her perspective. And so when I went to seminary, she like, all right, we have a family pastor. So I was like the family pastor,
Mm-hmm.
you know, through thick and through thick and thin, right? I held the memorial service for my grandfather, so it's been a difficult journey coming out, but like there's a lot more positive than negative, 100%.
I must
The
ask you.
truth really does set you free.
It really does.
Yeah.
I must ask, has anyone else in your family since leaving followed in your path or opened up their minds and been willing to follow?
Not that I'm aware of.
Hmm.
Not that I'm aware of.
Did any of them like
Yeah.
sincerely ask you? I imagine this is a no, but sincerely ask you and say, like,
Yeah.
what evidence is there? Like, what really convinced you that it's not true?
Yeah, and that's been like the great disappointment for me. Because you figure that they would be more like, holy cow, like this guy went to seminary, he was a pastor, he evangelized the family, and now he doesn't believe even in God. Maybe he's got good reasons for that, right?
Right.
Like if anyone's gonna sort of know in this family, it would be him. So maybe we should listen. Like if someone's got a deadly disease in the family and a family member is a doctor, right? Wouldn't you want to go and say, hey, why don't you check this out? And it's like not even that, like not even taking a genuine interest in like, hey, why do you not believe anymore?
Mm-hmm.
That's been my great disappointment.
But doesn't that
It's like they're
answer
not interested.
right? Doesn't that answer the question though of like this isn't about intellect. This is not about actual pursuit of evidence of truth, but it is more about their psychological, their cultural, and their emotions rather than it being about an actual logical process.
Absolutely. And then that's where like cognitive bias kicks in as well. Like cognitive bias is a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and so if you're unwilling or you're predisposed to reject anything that speaks against your beliefs, well, doesn't matter how convincing you are, you're not gonna take it. It's just gonna go in one ear and out the other.
This leads me to
um,
why I talk the way I did in this journey with you. And anyone who's watching this is like flying by this conversation in an airplane. They're looking down and they could see a big picture. I wanted to get this story because you went from devout, serious, absolutely convinced Jesus is the Son of God, died and rose again. You were going to seminary to preach this for the rest of your life and to convince others all across the world that this is true, to now I actually speak to convince people to doubt this and to show reasons why this doesn't make sense and why they shouldn't believe. And you going from so serious to the opposite, if you were to talk to yourself 15 years ago or whenever you were in seminary, can you predict what you would have said to yourself today?
15 years ago,
Or
I would
whenever
have
you were in
thought,
seminary?
yeah, I would have thought that maybe some of those doubts came from the devil.
Right.
And so, it's my responsibility to shun them away.
Do you think if you were sitting there in
Yeah.
front of a mirror or talking to yourself, do you how do you think you would have engaged with you today as someone in seminary if you were talking to yourself?
I would say to myself, hey, keep asking the questions. Don't, if you're not convinced of something, keep pursuing the real answer. And if there isn't one, then don't accept whatever idea sounds good to you.
Well said.
Just keep questioning. And ironically, this was said to me by a professor. He says he believes that the more you know, the more you know you don't know.
Right.
And many of us think that we know a lot, and we think that we know the Bible. But if you really are learning more and you know the Bible, you know that there's a lot that you don't know. So just keep on keeping on, keep on reading, keep on listening, keep on watching. If YouTube's your thing, many of us don't like to read or can afford books, and that's where this channel and like others are so vital in our day, in our present age. So
well said. And so now you are doing YouTube videos, you're talking about this stuff openly to get people to wake up. Is there anything we didn't discuss as far as your journey goes that you would like to mention?
I think what we've talked about pretty much sums it up. I think that I, like many others, have kept on asking the hard questions, and luckily we're here, and let's keep this journey. Theology or philosophy. It's meant to be a dialogue, and a continuous dialogue of ideas, and so keep on keeping on.
My final question to you is this: what would it take to convince you that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one can get to the Father except through him, and that he died and rose again from the dead 3 days later, etc., etc.? What would it take to convince you today?
I think that I first would have to be convinced that there is a God, and then beyond that, then maybe. But I even if that were true, I would still take issue on the way that he then went about doing things. Like I do believe that humans have been around for about 200,000 years,
right?
As we are, perhaps not as modern, but just thinking individuals with emotions, with morality, and so forth. And so why wait so long, and why make the message so convoluted? And why haven't you come down to clarify things, right? Like, surely you know everything, right? We believed in an omniscient God, so he knows we struggle with many issues. People die on a daily basis as a result of religious differences and biases and so forth. Why haven't you done anything? So, is it possible to convince me that there's a God out there? Maybe. I don't think that I affirm that there are no gods, period. I think that I'm a bit agnostic in that sense, that I wouldn't affirm it, but I'm certainly not convinced that the God that our current theologians describe, or the biblical God, which in itself is very confusing. What God are we really looking into?
Right.
Is this whole Yahweh thing, this El thing, this Elohim thing? It just gets so blurry, So it needs to be defined well. He needs to really come out if he does exist, and then maybe we'll look at something else. But I'm still disappointed with the way he went about doing things if he did exist.
Mark, this has been a fantastic discussion. I seriously appreciate it. And it just keeps reminding me, you brought some interesting things from my past up that nobody I've interviewed yet has talked about. This whole liberal thing. We always used to throw that word around. Oh, that's a liberal scholar. Don't listen to him. That just, like you said, poisons the well. And don't listen to them. And my channel practically hosts now nothing but those liberal scholars, because they're actually more accurate, getting closer to what is the reality of what's happening. But for me, I'm with you, man. It's the same thing for me. You'd have to convince me there was a God, and why don't we just get rid of divine hiddenness, have God show up, and that would convince us all. We wouldn't have a problem at that point. That doesn't happen. Why that doesn't happen? To me, I hear excuse after excuse, but ultimately, I'm not going to believe in this thing that I have no evidence for. And I'm with you on the same page. I'm glad that you're still talking with people still showing your family love, I'm sure, even in light of all of this. Hopefully they're reciprocating that love and showing you love back, even though they want you to believe so bad. I hope to have you back too. Let's have more conversations, and we can zero in on topics as well. So if you have watched Mark's work or you have an idea that we could discuss, let us know in the comment section. Any final words?
No, I thank you. Thank you for, just how amazing you are, for all the work, the hard work you do. To me, it's self-evident, the commitment that you've made, and, all the hard work that you do. And so we thank you, for all your sacrifice. And then I would just simply welcome an invitation. Like, if there's a lot of us that, we speak English, we're fluent, we study in English, but maybe your mother tongue, your original tongue is in Spanish, and some of these ideas, you'd want to hear about them in your own language. So if you speak Spanish, you're welcome to Nuestra Experiencia Atea, where we do this. We talk about current events. We talk about just the evil in the Bible. I recently did a series where I talked about how Yahweh is a monster.
And
is
that down here?
It is, yeah. So I went over several examples in the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible where you have these narratives that you're like, wow, like, how could you believe in such a God? And much more. So it's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I do look forward to participating more in your channel.
Thank you so much. Go subscribe to their YouTube channel. If you speak Spanish, or like he said, if you're interested in hearing it in Spanish, they have a channel there. Please do so. And also consider joining our Patreon, working very hard, bringing you early content and being able to private message me. You have access there. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining me here at MythVision. I look forward to talking to you again in the future. And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision. Ladies and gentlemen, join MythVision's Patreon, not only to support us, but there are 72 videos that I did with Dr. Dennis R. McDonald and Richard Carrier, all on the Patreon, early access. You guys can ask personal questions when I go to interview these scholars, and you're helping MythVision grow.